Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. We're just admitting a few more people from the lobby. So sit tight and we will be starting in just a couple of minutes. We just want to wait in case there's a couple of stragglers, but we'll get started soon. Well, I think maybe we'll get started. I think there will probably be a few people who will continue to join us over the next few minutes. So hopefully you won't find those little beeps too distracting. We'll try to get people in out of the lobby as quickly as possible. But let me start by introducing myself. My name is Lisa McCoy, and I'm the Executive Director for Tourette Canada. It's my great pleasure to welcome you here to our inaugural quarterly webinar series. And I want to thank you all very much for taking the time to join us. We're launching this webinar on the first day of Tourette Awareness Month. This is an international event that runs from today until the 15th of June. And in addition to this webinar, during the month, we will hold our 15th annual Trek for Tourette on Sunday, May the 28th. And with the help of many Canadian municipalities, we'll be illuminating more than 20 monuments across the country. Trek for Tourette is our most important fundraiser of the year. So if you have not yet registered, I encourage you to do so tonight. You can do that by visiting tourette.ca/Trek for Tourette. And you can participate from anywhere in the country by choosing our Trek Where You Live option. Or if you happen to be in or near one of the cities that's holding an in-person trek, please feel free to join. We have in-person treks in Kelowna, BC, Lethbridge, Alberta, Toronto, Ontario, Muskoka, Ontario, Hamilton, Halton, Ontario, and Lethbridge, Alberta. So I thank you in advance for your support with that. So hopefully you all received an email this evening alerting you to a slight change in the proceedings. Due to illness, the webinar you will see tonight has been pre-recorded. Tonight's webinar is being presented by our fabulous speaker, Jan Stewart. Jan is a highly regarded mental health advocate who also recently launched a powerful book, Hold On Tight, A Parent's Journey Raising Children with Mental Illness, in which she candidly describes the shock she and her husband faced when each of their two young children started exhibiting some troubling behaviors. Jan is going to be here with us this evening, but will be sitting quietly through the presentation with us, as she has very little speaking voice tonight due to her illness. Should you have questions for Jan, though, I encourage you to use the Q&A function, which you'll see at the top of your screen, to jot down any questions. Should Jan feel that she's able to respond to some questions tonight, she will attempt to do that at the end of the presentation. But if not, we will make note of all your questions, and Jan will gladly respond to you via email as soon as she's able. So I know you're going to find Jan's presentation offers invaluable insights from her personal experience, which we all hope will provide information and encouragement to parents of children with Tourette syndrome and Tourette syndrome plus. So without any further ado, we will begin tonight's recorded presentation, and I hope you enjoy it. I'm sure you will.
Thank you, Lisa. It's wonderful to be with you all here tonight, particularly as we celebrate Tourette Syndrome Awareness Month. I'm delighted to be here. Like many of you, my husband David and I grew up in warm, loving families. Neither of us had known true adversity in our lives before we got married. We both have our MBAs, had great careers on Bay Street. Life was rosy. And then we had children. Finding out that we didn't have one, but two children with multiple mental health and neurodevelopmental disorders came as quite a shock to us and turned our lives upside down. Words like Tourette syndrome, autism, obsessive compulsive disorder, ADHD, executive function, anxiety, and learning disabilities had never been part of my vocabulary before. That said, I am here as an ambassador of hope and perseverance. I'm here to tell you our family story, but also to spread the message to all of us to persevere. There's lots of help out there, and we can all do it. By the way, I've been asked to repeat to please put your questions in the Q&A box as we go, and we will reserve time at the end to address them. Thank you. I want to start with one quick disclaimer. I am white, heterosexual, and privileged. And that has certainly shaped my experiences and made the journey for our family far easier in terms of being able to afford the sometimes exorbitant costs that come with raising neurodivergent children. But what I want to emphasize tonight is that the insights and the life lessons I'm going to share throughout this presentation are universal. They apply whether you're married or single, struggling financially or comfortable, and they cross all boundaries: race, religion, cultures, ethnicities, sexual orientation, gender identity. It doesn't matter. What it takes is grit, determination, that keyword perseverance, and the will to succeed. And we can all do that. As I reflect on our journey, and it's a journey that continues today, there is one overarching insight that I want to start the presentation with. And that's to insist on an integrated partnership approach with everyone involved in your child's care. This crosses all facets of your child's life and extends into adulthood. In healthcare to this day, I make sure that the children's psychiatrists and psychologists communicate with one another so they know what's going on and can adjust their medication and therapeutic approaches accordingly. When the children were in school, we made sure that those schools worked in partnership with us, or we wouldn't have kept them there. Andrew's school sent notes home every night and returned them the following morning. And Ainsley's school held monthly group meetings with their principal, all her teachers, her external psychologist, and us, so that we could share information and make plans. Didn't always work, but she was able to stay in school. The key is that you want everyone on the same page, listening to each other's perspectives and planning together. To me, partnerships and teamwork mean everything. So you've heard that I have 2 children, Andrew and Ainsley, and they're absolutely amazing. They're grown now, but from almost the time they were born, David and I felt that something wasn't right. As a baby, Andrew's hands and feet moved constantly in circular motion. Unlike other babies, he didn't talk to himself, gurgle, or play in his crib. And he had no self-control when it came to feeding. We actually did an experiment when he was 6 months old and decided to give him as many bottles of milk as he wanted and see what happens. But after he consumed 5 straight bottles without stopping, and by the way, would have kept going without getting sick, we were scared and stopped him. The next day, we decided to control his intake and gave him just 1 bottle. And to our surprise, he was just as happy. So we saw that even then, as a baby, there were difficulties with self-regulation. In hindsight, we know these are a number of neurodevelopmental markers, but of course we were first-time parents, inexperienced. We didn't know any better. And every time I raised a concern with the pediatrician, he turned to me and said, "Jen, calm down. Your children are just fine. You need to stop being an overly vigilant, triple type A parent." As if I were the problem. This is unfortunately far too common, and I should have trusted my gut. And this is a key life lesson. You know your children better than anyone else. If you think something is seriously wrong with your child, it generally is. Of course, you have to listen to your doctor, and I am sympathetic with doctors who see a number of parents who needlessly and excessively worry. But if what they say doesn't resonate with you, keep looking. You deserve that. Over the next several years, David and I continued to have growing concerns about both children. There were vocal and motor tics, impulsivity and distractibility, anxiety, and learning disabilities. Neither child could hold a pencil or crayon correctly. Andrew had a lot of difficulty with change and transitions between activities. And he also was fairly literal. Ainsley, who was far easier as a baby and toddler, got to school and was out of control and disruptive, constantly sent to the principal's office. And then came a lot of fragility, more tics, more anxiety, and the inability to read her friend's social cues, so that she gradually lost every friend she had in the neighborhood. But again, our doctor kept discounting my concerns. Children both learned to read and write on time, and particularly when it came to the tics, he would say to me, they're just under a bit of stress. Don't worry, this will pass. Shortly after Andrew turned 9, out of the blue, for no reason that he or any of us in our family could identify, he erupted into 2-hour frightening meltdowns almost every day. They were terrifying. And this was followed within a month by nonstop compulsive rituals. He touched walls repeatedly for hours, rubbed his head against shrubs and bushes, even got down on the filthy floor and licked it. I felt like I was in the twilight zone, but his behavior and symptomology were so severe that he was finally clearly diagnosed. Autism, obsessive compulsive disorder, ADHD, learning disabilities, and of course the umbrella diagnosis, Tourette syndrome. And with Ainsley, we didn't know at first if she was imitating her older brother, whom she adored. I mean, they both had tics. They both were highly impulsive and anxious. But her behavior was so vastly different. Andrew was rule-bound, and she was really out of control. And again, it was clear in her case. So in addition to Tourette syndrome, also ADHD and learning disabilities, as well as severe mood and anxiety disorders. As I write in Hold On Tight, it's been a challenging journey to find the right psychiatrists, psychologists, and schools. So what's the first thing I did? I embraced the power of research. Now, we all know that research is important in terms of helping us find the right resources, but it also helps us become more effective advocates. I read everything that I could, watched videos on Tourette syndrome, read classic books about ADHD like Driven to Distraction by Edward Hallowell, or classic books about OCD, The Boy Who Couldn't Stop Washing by Judith Rappaport. David and I also started looking for support groups. We did that research again. And the first support group we went to was for parents of children with ADHD. And it was wonderful to meet parents who had children like ours, who were impulsive, distracted, hyperactive. But no one else had a child who was experiencing almost those daily rages, or who was ticking as much as both my kids. And it was only a few months later, when David happened to be researching Tourette syndrome, that he saw the word rage associated with emotional overload. And I can't tell you how quickly we ran to our nearest Tourette Canada support group. And it's there that we met so many wonderful parents of children like ours, and we formed such a wonderful reaffirming community. More about that later. Of course, with research, it can be never ending, and the law of diminishing returns does kick in. So you have to know when to take a breather, but you never completely stop. There are always new findings, therapies, treatments, medications, and it's important to stay current. I know you all know to be wary about the internet, but it is a crucial source of research. Just make sure that you verify all information with experts. I'm sure we have all read that our children could stop ticking if they wanted. They just want attention, or that ADHD is caused by poor parenting. There's no evidence to any of that. Once the children were diagnosed, we entered the powerful world of medications and therapy. To me, these are partners, there's that word again, that help one another. Of course, if your child's Tourette syndrome is mild and doesn't interfere in their daily life or their functioning, you may not need either. And it may be that either therapy alone or medications alone can really help. But for many children, including Andrew and Ainsley, they've needed both medications and therapy from the beginning, and they will throughout their lives, which is fine. They've also needed the medications to start working and kick in first, to change the brain chemistry enough to allow therapy to start. And of course, co-occurring conditions, also called associated conditions or comorbidities, can complicate matters. The conditions all often overlap and can look alike. And on top of that, one medication can help one disorder or condition and not the other. So it's very tricky and you have to watch. I also know that with medications, a number of parents are understandably concerned about taking a pharmacological approach to treatment. And there's no question you have to weigh the side effects and monitor the delicate interactions between the medications. After 9 months of those daily frightening meltdowns that Andrew had, I found a new developmental pediatrician who prescribed a powerful antipsychotic medication. And I kid you not, his meltdowns stopped 2 days later in their tracks, no more. We were so relieved, although I kicked myself that I hadn't found this doctor earlier. But there were concerning side effects with the medications. Andrew started gaining 3 pounds every week, and this continued for 6 straight weeks. Thankfully, it stopped at that point. But I know other children who have gained 60 and 70 pounds on this medication. But it's been a lifesaver for Andrew, and it still is today. And Ainsley has tried a number of medications, some of which have been very effective, some of which haven't, and some of which have caused side effects like loss of appetite, loss of sleep, dizziness, shakiness, nausea. So there's lots of trial and error and mistakes on the way. But at least for our family, the benefits of medications have far outweighed the risks. And remember, too, that every government has resources to help defray the costs. In Ontario, for example, we have the Trillium Drug Program, among others. So there are options, and you have to keep going. And when it comes to therapy, here you see Ainsley at Sick Kids Hospital in downtown Toronto with her psychologist working, I believe, on her anxiety. You must find qualified professionals who are trained in your children's issues and conditions. In Tourette syndrome, I think most of you know it's CBIT, Comprehensive Behavioral Intervention for Tics. It's a wonderful way for children to learn to become aware of their tics, urge to tic, the triggers that increase tics. They learn competing response behaviors when they feel the urge, and relaxation training. It's really a habit reversal therapy, as you know. Remember that therapy is a family affair. Tourette syndrome and associated conditions affect every member of the family, and every family member should be involved in therapy. As parents, we can get trained based on CBIT. First thing I did was I learned to recognize and deal with my own reactions and emotions. And I did have some frustration, and I did have some annoyance at times. Last week, a parent told me she was actually embarrassed by her child's tics, and that's a shame. I learned to help identify situations that might heighten the tics, and I learned strategies to deal with those disruptive behaviors that often accompany Tourette. Of course, we want to use positive reinforcement and praise, particularly when the child is engaged in competing response training. It's wonderful to see. And I had to learn not to react to the tics or treat Andrew or Ainsley differently because of them, to really focus on their strengths. Structure and routines are so key. And if we all tried to learn, we're not very good at it, relaxation techniques as well. Now, some of the more common associated conditions and disorders include ADHD and anxiety. And there, it's cognitive behavioral therapy generally. And for those with obsessive compulsive disorder, Andrew, for example, learned exposure and response prevention. So there are many different types of therapeutic approaches. What we have to remember is that the environment is unique to each child, and that differences are not deficits. Throughout this period, David and I learned, sorry, I'm blocking this, the importance of talking openly with our children. This is a key insight. Neurodivergent children are naturally frightened. They don't know what's going on in their lives and why they're causing such pain and havoc at home and at school. They want help. They want explanations, even if they don't ask for it. So sit down with them. Listen carefully without criticism or judgment. Not one of my strengths, frankly. Let them know they're valued and understood. David and I had to overcome our initial hesitations in this regard. When Andrew was having those frightening meltdowns and rituals, he told us one day that he felt he was going crazy and wanted to die. And I just froze. And this was followed fairly quickly by Ainsley, After she was sent to the principal's office for the umpteenth time, she wrote me a note that said, "Mom, I know I'm a bad child, but I can't help my out of control behavior." And I just shrunk. But David and I moved quickly. We picked ourselves up, sat down with the children, made sure they understood they were not bad children, that what was happening was not their faults. And we separated them from their issues so that their identities weren't 100% tied to them. We also importantly didn't hide or avoid information. I think this is so important. And this includes discussing medications with your children. It upsets me when I hear parents, and I understand why they do this, but rename the medications special vitamins. I know they want the kids to take their meds and they don't want them to feel different or singled out, but I don't think that's helpful. What you want to do is educate your child, involve them, so that as they grow older, they increasingly become empowered and can become more and more involved in their own treatment and self-advocacy. That's what we should all want as parents. And don't forget siblings. It's so easy to unintentionally relegate a sibling who has fewer issues, like Ainsley, or no issues, to the background while you're consumed with a child in crisis. I know I've done it. I came home one afternoon from work and found Ainsley hiding in fear, shivering and shaking in her closet while Andrew was having one of those horrific meltdowns. And it upset me a great deal. So David and I started spending whatever precious little time we had, and believe me, it was precious little, one-on-one in activities that she enjoyed. Must be activities that the child enjoys. In her case, it was playing hockey and soccer, baking together, playing certain board games like Candyland and Hamburger. Riverdale Farm in downtown Toronto at the time had a wonderful urban farm program for siblings in trauma that gave her desperately needed respite and also started her on a lifelong love of animals. Sibling support groups, so helpful. And perhaps most importantly, we sat down with her again and in age-appropriate language, really explained what was going on with Andrew so that we demystified it and she became less frightened. Throughout this period, David and I had to learn this key insight: reset the expectations for your lives. Tourette syndrome, and particularly the associated conditions, can throw every family member's life into disarray. There can be fear, anger, and resentment. It's okay. I can't tell you how many times I've looked at myself in the mirror and said, why me? Why us? But the key to being able to move forward is to not only accept, but to embrace the fact that your life is not going to be as planned for or hoped for in some ways. And that's okay. David and I started our journey the same as all young parents, with hopes and dreams of happy, successful children. But our reality was so different. We were drained, we were frightened. We had to stop having a social life for a number of years because we never knew what the behavior would be. Now, what I want you to know is Tourette syndrome in and of itself didn't really cause a lot of problems, except when Andrew would throw his neck back. I would definitely get concerned physically that he would harm himself, and there were a few others. But it's really the associated conditions that Andrew and Ainsley have had that have caused, for us at least, the most distress. We also had to learn another key life lesson as part of resetting our expectations, and that is recalibrating the support we could expect to receive from certain family members and friends. This comes from a lack of education and awareness that can lead to fear, misunderstandings, and stigma. Both our families were extremely well-meaning, but even my mother, who I thought understood everything, actually turned to me one afternoon after Andrew had started this life-saving medication that stopped his meltdowns in their tracks, but started gaining all that weight. And she said to me, "Jan, you don't want a fat child." I've heard parents tell me their families are not interested, are scared of the challenges, And 2 weeks ago, I even had a parent call me and tell me that a relative just said, "Oh, it's too bad. Your son will never be able to live a normal life." I mean, really? So what you've got to do is learn to navigate and limit your engagement with those family members who are critical, judgmental, or I think the worst case is the ones that think they have all the answers and offer unasked for advice. And with friends, don't be surprised if some of them distance themselves for the same reasons. It's quite upsetting. I've had it happen. And what made it worse in my case is I was so consumed with the children's care that I had no time to invest in maintaining my friendships. But the silver lining again is those other parents of similar children, of children with Tourette syndrome. Wonderful community of acceptance, understanding, empathy. We even have laughed about situations that other families might not find so funny or understand. Years ago, Andrew and I were walking with our dog through some trails in Toronto, and he was ticking vocally. He was hooting. It sounded like whoo, whoo, whoo. And a passerby came running up and said to him, "Are you okay?" And I remember thinking, uh-oh, how is he going to react? And without batting an eye, he looked at her and he said, "I'm just fine. I'm just bird calling." I don't know how he came up with that response, but it was brilliant. And it's those other parents and families that have really given us hope and propelled me forward to persevere. As the children transitioned to adults, we faced a whole new set of challenges. Again, for you parents of younger children, you may not know what your children's capabilities and needs are going to be as adults. And it can be very expensive. You may have to take care of them longer than you imagined. You just don't know. We're talking about medications not covered by insurance, private therapy, and for some of you, some type of supportive housing. Let me first talk about employment. Finding and keeping meaningful employment can be very difficult for neurodivergent individuals. The unemployment rate is significantly higher than the general population, and there's even more underemployment. Of course, as we know, there is also, unfortunately, needless discrimination and stigma. When I look at Andrew, he has many vocal and motor tics. He has a major speech impediment, and he doesn't understand social cues. He takes more of a supervisor's time, and he needs more time off for medical and healthcare appointments. By the way, remember that every government has resources to help in this regard. In Ontario, we have the ODSP, Ontario Disability Support Program, both income supports and employment supports, and we've used those employment supports extensively. And there are other job assistance programs that you're going to hear about as well. So that's important. And as I write and hold on tight, there's quite a contrast between Andrew's previous employers and his current employer, which, as you see proudly displayed on his shirt, is Rogers Communications. His previous employers were both well-meaning, but the first one, where he was a cashier at a major retailer and he had excelled at his job, new management came in, and they didn't want someone who was ticking loudly to interact with customers on the front line. They tried to shove him in the background stocking shelves. You can imagine how irate I was, and I took care of that one quickly. His second employer really wanted to do the right thing, but they were so bureaucratic. And again, they couldn't work in that keyword partnership with Andrew and with us. So what did they do? They treated him like a child. They gave him 1 hour of boring work every morning. And no one likes boring work, but particularly the brain with ADHD doesn't. And then they told him as a reward, he could go watch TV. That wasn't very meaningful. But Rogers has translated that well-meaning into practice. And a key part of Andrew's success over the past 4.5 years with Rogers is that word partnership. Neurodivergent individuals need to really be able to advocate for themselves, take the lead, let the employer know what you need. and then you can get customized accommodations. If you don't feel adept at that, certainly bring an advocate, bring an ally. It can be a family member, it can be a friend, it can even be a professional. There are lots of options. Before Andrew even started the first day at Rogers, he and I held an in-service education session with his managers, human resources, and the well-being team there. We explained Andrew's profile, his strengths importantly. We discussed what Tourette syndrome and his associated conditions were, and how they affected his work, which is largely, in his case, impulsivity and anxiety. And we talked about what they could do to maximize his success and help themselves. And since that time, as I said, it's been over 4 years, they've been wonderful partners. On our recommendation, they brought in a job coach to work with Rogers and Andrew, not only to help integrate Andrew initially, but every month they meet with both of them. They've also customized, Rogers has customized accommodations for Andrew. I said earlier that he has difficulty with change and transitions between activities. So they've set his work hours the same every day, while the rest of his team members work on shift. And what they get in return is a valued, hardworking employee who wants to stay at Rogers till he's 70 and be the best employee there, not just the best disabled employee. Now, I mentioned earlier, another area that you may have to address is some type of support in housing. There's a whole continuum of needs. Ainsley doesn't need any help. As Andrew became a young adult, we knew he would need some type of help. We weren't sure what. So, got on the wait list, realizing that they're quite long, 7, 10 years, sometimes longer. It's tragic. And then I went back to research, that key insight. And about 9 months later, found a lovely small private group home just about 10, 15 minutes away from our home. And Andrew moved there enthusiastically. Very expensive. And so, yes, you have to get creative if finances are of a concern. There are families that take in neurodivergent individuals. You might rent a unit and have a support worker come in as needed, a pull-out couch. And there are organizations like Lights, which is a partnership with Community Living Toronto, and a number of other options. So persevere there. After 10 wonderful years, management changed the profile of the residents, and this was their right, and they wanted to focus more on independence. And that's the last thing Andrew needs. He needs protection and security. So back to research I went. And by this time, we felt pretty confident that Andrew could handle supportive independent living. We found a bright, sunny 1-bedroom, just 5-minute walk from our place. And since that time, it's been about 5 years now, we take turns going down every morning to oversee him getting up. We help prepare his meals. We make sure he's tidied up, and then off he goes to work. And Ainsley has found a place just another 5 minutes away. And it gives us all great comfort to be near each other. And it gives the children a lot of security to know that they're there for each other as well. And although life has been tough for us at times, it has equally propelled all of us in our family into advocacy years ago. David co-leads the Toronto Tourette Canada support group. Ainsley's very active in it, and she's getting ready for the upcoming Tourette Trek, which we're looking forward to. And Andrew is active in Rogers Inclusion and Diversity Initiatives, and also active in the Tourette Trek and the support group. I've been on about 7 different boards and advisory councils through the years in both Canada and the US. I was vice chair at CAMH. I currently chair Carrie's Place Autism Services, the largest autism services provider in this country. I'm a consultant and very proud consultant to the Tourette Association of America Education Advisory Board, and I write a monthly column for Today's Parent on Autism. From all these activities and advocacy, many struggling parents have reached out to David and me over the years. And I so remember being in their shoes, frightened frozen, not knowing where to turn or how, feeling isolated and alone. And that's why I wrote Hold On Tight. I want readers to understand the reality of raising neurodivergent children. I want to better educate their families, friends, healthcare providers, educators, and employers. But I importantly celebrate successes. And I gift readers with a number of the key insights that I've been sharing with you tonight. Let me just share a few more with you before I close. If you haven't done a full financial plan, or if you've done one and haven't updated recently, now is the time to do so. As I said earlier, you may not know your child's capabilities if they're younger now when they grow up. So be conservative. This is something you can revisit and update from time to time as you gain more clarity about your child's capabilities and needs. As the American author Alan Lakin says, failing to plan is planning to fail. And if you're not adept at it, find a financial planner, ideally a fee-based financial planner who doesn't sell product and is objective. They're not expensive, and it makes the world of difference between having a more secure future and a more uncertain one. Be kind to your partner. Now, this is true for all partnerships and marriages, has nothing to do with Tourette syndrome or neurodiversity. But we know that when we have children with challenges, the stresses and strains are magnified and can be debilitating. And a number of marriages and partnerships really are wrecked. I've heard parents blame one another, accuse, undermine one another. There can be disagreements about everything from diagnoses and discipline to therapy and medications. Medications in particular tend to cause a lot of parental disagreements. One parent may not believe in medications, may not believe that the child needs medications, or may be understandably concerned that the child is going to turn into a zombie. Please remember that these issues divide partners and that children have inbuilt antennae. They know when their parents aren't on the same page. David and I, again, not immune from this. We've had so little time for each other at times. But the key is that we trust one another. We lean on one another. We even joke about the genesis of the kids' disorders. A few years ago, one of David's relatives came to visit. And throughout dinner, he was shoulder shrugging and eye ticking. So after he left, I turned to David and said, aha, now we know where the Tourette syndrome comes from. And he turned right back at me with my perfectionism and said, aha, back, OCD. You know, it really doesn't matter where these disorders come from a family perspective. Interesting and important from a research and clinical perspective. What's important is that we parents act harmoniously as a unit as much as possible in the child's best interest. Give each other the benefit of the doubt. It's important. And take care of yourself. This goes far beyond eating properly, sleeping, exercising. Those are all very, very important, and you don't want to forget those. But reach out for the support you need, whether it's to psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers. As I've said, I found other support groups and parents of neurodivergent children to be my home, my community, and to strengthen my emotional fortitude. Don't forget humor. It's a very important part of the coping toolkit that we have in our family. Years ago, one of Andrew's teachers turned to him and said, Andrew, that school rule is set in stone. And you know what I'm going to say. He's literal. So he looked at her and said, where's the stone kept? So we do try to poke fun at our lives and not take them too seriously all the time. You must carve out part of your life as your own, away from your partner, away from your children. You can too easily get lost in the morass of your children's struggles and burnout. So whether it's your career, I had a very high pressure career and I loved my work and thrived. But part of it was that it gave me that respite away from the challenges at home. It could be hobbies. I play duplicate bridge at a very high level and compete, and I've got to focus 200% on bridge and on nothing else. And at the gym, I'm on the treadmill 5 days a week, and that really helps me think through my issues and regain perspective. You must take breaks, whether it's just a 10-15-minute walk by yourself, or I love a warm, soothing bubble bath. All these activities help you gain some breathing room, refuel, and rebuild your own identity. And importantly, try to forgive yourself for your mistakes. This is not one of my strengths. I look back in horror at finding Ainsley shivering in fear in the closet during one of Andrew's meltdowns. I should have protected her better. But I also know the importance of complimenting myself. Please pat yourself on the back. Remind yourselves of your strength, fortitude, and perseverance, that word again. And so while Andrew and Ainsley have had an incredibly endless roller coaster of a life, and they've been through quite a journey, I look at them today with such pride. Andrew has this wonderful job at Rogers Communications. He advocates for himself, and he has an infectious charm. We were recently on the subway, and he loves baseball and the Toronto Blue Jays. And across the aisle was a young man sitting with a Toronto Blue Jays cap. And Andrew reached out and started chatting with him. And the next thing I knew, the 5 to 10 people all sitting around us had all joined in. Andrew just seems to have that effect on people. It's wonderful to see. And Ainsley is such a gifted child and youth counselor working with young neurodivergent individuals. And I'm convinced that it's her own lived experiences, as well as her deep intrinsic knowledge of Andrew, that have made her such a valued resource. What I see in them that's so breathtaking is that grit, determination, and will to succeed. As I said at the beginning, I am here as an ambassador of hope and perseverance. You can sign up for my quarterly newsletter for more insights and tips through my website, which, as you see, is janstewartauthor.com. I post on Instagram and Facebook every day about neurodiversity at Jan Stewart Author. And Hold On Tight is widely available. I'm thrilled it's won the Mom's Choice Award. And if it resonates with you, let me know. And I'd also love an Amazon review if you would consider doing so. During this Tourette Syndrome Awareness Month, I celebrate every individual with Tourette syndrome. I hope that I have given you the inspiration and empowerment to persevere through the most difficult of times. Have hope and hold on tight. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand it back to Lisa now, and we would be open to questions.
Well, there you go. Wasn't that wonderful? Thank you so much, Jan. As I mentioned at the beginning, while that presentation was recorded, Jan has been very kind to sit quietly in the background. Poor Jan is quite ill right now. I had texted her to say, wow, you look fantastic. And I know based on our conversation earlier, she is not feeling fantastic. So thank you so much, Jan, for persevering through this evening. I know it meant a lot to you to be able to be here. It certainly means a lot to us. You know, your insights were extremely helpful and personal. So thank you for that. I have been monitoring the Q&A, and I don't see any questions in there right now, although I did jot one down myself because, you know, as you were going through the presentation, I was thinking, wow, you know, that's a lot. It's a lot for the child, but it's also a lot for each of the parents. And as I think you touched on, you know, as parents, we're a team, but we're also individuals. And I can imagine there were probably times when you didn't always agree on a particular course of action. So, talk to us a little bit, if you don't mind, about how you worked through those challenges when, you weren't on the same page in terms of a next step with one of
Yeah.
your children.
So or with both. It's absolutely delightful to join you all tonight. I hope you can all hear my voice, okay? And I'm so sorry I couldn't do the presentation live, so to speak, but there's no question that David and I have been very fortunate, but I think there are a few secrets. There is no question that there are times we want to throttle each other. He's much slower than I am, and it can drive me nuts. And he correctly finds me overly decisive, and I make decisions far too quickly, too. On the flip side of that is that we balance each other, and he calms me down, and I instill more urgency in him. But we do have certain golden rules that we followed from the beginning. One is that we try never to disagree in front of the children. And they're grown now, and we still don't. They're hyper vigilant themselves and get very upset when they think one of us is upset. And so we're very careful about to take that offline, so to speak. I think naturally what's worked for us is to live somewhat parallel lives. We give each other the benefit of the doubt and love each other. We always remember that we're each trying our best. It may not be what we would do, but we remember that. But those parallel lives give us that breathing room. And for me, it's particularly important to regain perspective so I can see what David has done. And as part of that in our marriage, we've each naturally gravitated to different lead roles. And as I've talked to many different parents, I think this is common. I tend to take the lead in finding the doctors and the schools, housing, the employers, that kind, interacting. Where David is more equally important, the fun parent, where he, when the kids were little, coached their hockey and baseball and soccer teams, helped coach them, took them camping with other dads, went traveling with them, all kinds of things like that. It's not that he hasn't wanted to do the heavy lifting. It's that I think I'm internally wired to take charge that way, and it's worked for us. So I think every partnership has to find what works for them, but the key is be a unit in front of your children and really lean on one another. If you can't trust one another, there is no foundation. And for us, that's the key foundation.
Thanks, Jan. Yeah, I can imagine, and it's good to hear that. And I know based on my experience in chatting with people across the country, parents, sometimes, often there isn't a partner. You
Yes.
are the parent, you are on your own, and as you quite rightly mentioned, and certainly it will come as no surprise to the folks on this webinar, there just seems to be such a lack of programs and services available to people with Tourette syndrome and Tourette syndrome plus. Maybe sometimes more the plus than the Tourette syndrome itself, and I think it varies widely across the country. Here at Tourette Canada, we've worked hard to put together a service directory and try to keep it up to date that sort of identifies where there are various different specialists, allied healthcare professionals and medical professionals, programs and services for children, youth, and adults. But it is really slim pickings. And so you talked about the importance of advocacy, and I think certainly one of the things that we at Tourette Canada want to do more of with the help of our volunteers is bring that situation to light with governments, with everyone, just to say, this is a really underserviced community that has tremendous potential, but really needs help. So what are your recommendations around, you talked a lot about advocating for your children and for your family, but advocacy in the broader sense, how can
Mhm.
we all pitch in to sort of ensure that there are more of these services and healthcare professionals out there to support our children and our families?
It's a great question, and the situation is really terrible. Sometimes I think it's improving, in certain ways it is, and in other times, it's just we're still way behind the 8 ball. Our community still remains, unfortunately, overly fractured without enough power and cohesion, but it's going to come. And the exciting thing for me is to see individuals with Tourette themselves increasingly advocating. And that's going to be the most important and most effective, to me, groundswell that we're going to have. Now, that said, from a parental point of view, there's no question that not every parent of a neurodivergent child is in a position to advocate or volunteer. When you're in crisis in particular, you just don't have the energy or the emotional reserves. Forgive yourself for that, you're allowed. But when the crisis lifts, if you can find it within yourself, it's so beneficial, and I find it personally uplifting to see the difference we can make in children's lives, to make sure the voices are heard, that we can have an impact and affect our Canada's and our provincial and federal, everything, healthcare decisions. Advocacy and volunteering comes in all different kinds of ways. The very first advocacy I did when Andrew was first diagnosed with OCD at Sick Kids, there was in all of Canada, there was no parent support group for parents of kids with OCD. So Andrew's psychiatrist and I created it and formed it. And that's my point. If it's not there, if you have the wherewithal, and again, not everyone does, but if you can, and you're going to make mistakes on the way, I've made tons of mistakes and continue to, go for it. You have nothing to lose. I've become a squeaky wheel, and you've got to get out there and make sure you're heard, but you've got to do it in a way where you're assertive rather than overly aggressive. You want to put yourself in the other individual's shoes and say, what does that individual need? And then you can come together in a win-win. To me, there's absolutely almost no other worthwhile activity than moving the neurodiversity agenda forward.
That's great, Jan. Thank you. We did just have a comment here, really, that just says that your story is really resonating. There's obviously folks, probably more than one on the call, with children with Tourette, ADHD, OCD, anxiety, learning disabilities, and obviously there are people who have two children like you, and it sounds like some of them are sort of taking your path in terms of really doing the research. There is a question about anywhere that any suggestions where they can learn and become a bigger and better advocate for my children. So it sounds a little bit like we just talked about. And maybe I can just step in with this one just to say, based on what we've just been talking about, I think we all agree that this advocacy piece is extremely important. Certainly in the coming year, it will become more of a focus for Tourette Canada, and we will be looking for volunteers to help us with that across Canada. We want to be advocating in many different ways, but particularly with governments, provincial and federal governments. We want to make sure that while we're all sharing our own personal stories in the advocacy, that we're also sort of all on the same page in terms of sharing some key messages consistently. Sometimes when you're advocating with government, if you're not all on the same page, if at the end of the day, after all the stories are told, you don't have maybe 2 or 3 consistent asks, then when people come together in Parliament, they say, we're not sure what they're asking for because they're all over the map. So those are some of the things that we're working on, and certainly reach out to me if it's something that interests you, because like I said, over the next 6 months or so, we'll be looking for some volunteers who are keen to help us with that advocacy strategy.
And Lisa, if I may add to that, for parents who are new at advocacy, start small. You don't have to start with everything big. You can just start advocating for your child at school, just on an individual, your child basis to start with. Get comfortable with that. Remember that keyword partnership. Activities, whether they're playing soccer, hockey, whether they're in art class and they need accommodations or not, advocate that way to start, and then you can slowly build. I didn't become vice chair of CAMH immediately or chair Carrie's place now. That's been 25 years in the making, step by step, and it comes.
Well, thank you so much, Jan. I'm just mindful of the time. I'm sure that everybody has gotten so much out of your presentation. And I'll just say to everyone who's joined us, thank you again. And if over the next 24 or 48 hours, you do think of some questions you'd like to ask Jan, please feel free to email me and I will gladly pass your questions along to Jan. You can reach me at executivedirector@tourette.ca. And I know Jan will get to your questions and respond as quickly as possible.
Absolutely.
But thank you all again for joining us. Jan, thank you so much. I know, especially when you're unwell, that you made a point of showing up and recording your presentation and all of that. So we truly appreciate it. And we'll be sharing more information about our next quarterly webinar. But in the meantime, Jan is going to join us again on June the 7th, a little bit later in the day from 9 till 10 p.m. Eastern. So that if there's a few folks across the country that that time works better for, it'll be the same presentation. But if you want to join again, you'll have an opportunity to register. And otherwise, look forward to new presentations coming in the fall. So thank you so much. And I hope everyone has a great evening.
Have a great evening. Delightful to be here.
Bye.